At 9:17 on the morning of January 22nd, 1943, Second Lieutenant Daniel Cross crouched in the ruins of a Japanese bunker west of Point Cruz, watching a banyan tree 240 yards away through a scope his fellow officers had laughed at for 6 weeks. The jungle around him was a steaming, rotting mess of vegetation that smelled of wet earth and decay, a place where visibility was measured in feet and death usually came from nowhere. The air hung thick and still, no wind, the kind of stillness that amplifies every sound. Birds screaming in the canopy, insects buzzing in clouds so dense you could taste them, the distant thump of artillery that never stopped. Never. Cross was 27 years old, an Illinois state champion marksman, and he had exactly 0 confirmed kills to his name. But the men around him were dying. In the past 72 hours, 14 soldiers from the 132nd Infantry Regiment had been shot. Not by stray rounds, not by artillery fragments. These were precision shots that took men in the neck or the head while they were filling canteens, while they were walking patrol, while they were eating cold rations in what they thought was cover. The battalion was paralyzed. They were being hunted by ghosts who lived in the trees, and Daniel Cross was the only man desperate enough to think he could hunt them back with a civilian deer rifle. The Winchester Model 70 resting on the broken concrete in front of him weighed 9 pounds. With the Lyman Alaskan scope mounted on top, it pushed past 9 3/4. It was a bolt-action sporting rifle with a polished wooden stock that looked like something you would take on a weekend trip to the Rockies to bag an elk. It did not look like something you took to the South Pacific to fight the Imperial Japanese Army. When Cross had unpacked it at Camp Forest in Tennessee, the armorer had looked at it with open disdain. This for deer or Japs. The other platoon leaders called it his mail-order sweetheart. Captain Hayes had been even blunter. He called the rifle a toy, ordered Cross to leave the sporting rifle in his tent and carry a real weapon like an officer should. The real weapon they were talking about was the M1 Garand, and on paper the experts were right. The Garand was the gold standard of infantry warfare in 1943, a semi-automatic marvel that could fire 8 rounds as fast as you could pull the trigger. Rugged, reliable, it poured out firepower that kept enemy heads down. By comparison, Cross's Winchester was a relic. After every single shot he had to physically lift a steel handle, pull it back to eject the spent casing, and shove it forward to chamber a new round. It held only 5 rounds. It was slow. It was heavy. It was delicate. In a firefight at 20 yards, a man with a Winchester was dead meat against a man with a semi-automatic. The military logic was simple. Volume of fire wins battles. Precision was a luxury for peacetime. But the jungle of Guadalcanal didn't care about military logic. Cross had grown up in central Illinois. His father taught him to shoot when he was 15 years old. Not for sport, for survival. This was the Great Depression. Meat on the table meant deer in the woods. And deer in the woods meant patience, meant stillness, meant learning to see what didn't belong. His father had 2 rules. Rule 1, where there's one deer, there's always a doe nearby. Rule 2, if the deer is too easy, check for the wolf. At 23, Cross became the youngest Illinois state shooting champion in history. Put 5 rounds inside a 4-inch circle at 300 yards, shot 6-inch groups at 600 yards using iron sights. He wasn't bragging when he told people these things. He was stating physics, what he could do with a precision instrument. But physics didn't matter to Captain Hayes. Hayes believed in doctrine, in what the manual said. The manual said officers carry sidearms and lead men. The manual didn't say officers hunt enemy soldiers with custom deer rifles, so the Winchester stayed in Cross's tent, oiled, clean, useless, for 6 weeks, until Bradley died. Corporal Bradley was shot through the neck on January 19th while standing at a creek. The bullet came from somewhere in the trees. No one saw the muzzle flash. No one heard a second shot. Bradley dropped into the water and bled out in 90 seconds. Cross saw the body when they brought it back. The entry wound was small, precise, professional. The Japanese snipers weren't spraying bullets and hoping for hits. They were surgeons. And then Chen died. Private First Class Chen was on patrol with Cross on the afternoon of January 20th. They were moving through a coconut grove west of the airfield, staying low, watching the tree line. The shot came from nowhere. Chen dropped, clutched his chest, blood spreading across his uniform in a dark stain that grew too fast. Cross grabbed him, dragged him behind a fallen tree trunk, ripped open Chen's jacket. The bullet had entered just below the collarbone and punched through his lung. Chen was drowning, not in water, in his own blood. The sound he made was the worst thing Cross had ever heard, a wet, rattling wheeze, like trying to breathe through a straw filled with liquid. Every breath brought up pink foam, bubbles of blood that formed at his lips and popped. Cross pressed a field dressing into the wound, yelled for a medic, kept pressing. The dressing soaked through in seconds. Blood seeped between his fingers, hot, sticky. Chen's eyes opened, wide, aware, terrified. He tried to speak, couldn't. The only sound was that horrible wet rattling. Cross grabbed Chen's hand, held it tight. "Don't let me go," he wanted to say, but Chen couldn't say anything. His grip tightened, desperate. The medic didn't come. Chen lived for 40 minutes. 40 minutes of Cross holding him, pressing bandages into a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding, listening to his friends suffocate, watching the fear in his eyes slowly fade into something worse. Resignation. When Chen finally stopped breathing, Cross sat there with the body for another 10 minutes. Blood soaked into his uniform. His hands were red to the wrists. Chen had a wife in California, a daughter he'd never met, born while he was at sea. The baby was 8 months old. Chen showed Cross the photograph every morning, kept it in his breast pocket right over his heart. The bullet had gone through the photograph before it went through Chen's lung. Cross pulled the photo out. It was ruined, torn, blood-soaked, but you could still see the baby's face. Smiling. He folded it carefully and put it in his own pocket. That night, Cross couldn't sleep. He sat in his tent and counted. 14 men in 72 hours. The Japanese had 11 snipers operating in the Point Cruz groves. Intelligence confirmed it. 11 professionals who were systematically destroying the battalion's ability to function. Every supply run was a gauntlet. Every patrol was suicide. Men were refusing orders, not out of cowardice, out of mathematics. You can't fight what you can't see. The battalion commander was watching his unit disintegrate, not from casualties, from fear. He needed a solution, something the Japanese weren't expecting. That's when he summoned Cross. The meeting was short. The commander looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes. He'd been awake for 3 days straight, watching men die. "Can that mail-order rifle actually hit anything?" Cross didn't flinch. He laid out his credentials like he was reading a grocery list. Illinois State Championship at 1,000 yards in 1939. Youngest winner in the state's history at 23 years old. 5 rounds inside a 4-inch circle at 300 yards. 6-inch groups at 600 using iron sights. He wasn't asking for permission anymore. He was stating capability. The commander listened. He didn't care about trophies. He cared about stopping the bleeding. "You have until morning to prove it." Cross spent that night preparing for what was essentially a suicide mission. He was going to go out alone, without a spotter, without a radio, into the kill zone where 14 men had just died. He sat in his tent and stripped the Winchester down. The rifle had been packed in cosmoline for the ocean voyage, a thick, grease-like preservative. He'd already cleaned it once. He cleaned it again, every inch, until the metal gleamed in the lamplight. He checked the Lyman Alaskan scope mounts, tightened the screws until they were rock solid. The scope offered 2.5 power magnification. By modern standards, that was nothing, barely better than squinting. But compared to the iron sights on a Garonne, it was a telescope. It was enough to see the twitch of a finger, the unnatural straight line of a rifle barrel against a chaotic background of vines. He loaded 5 rounds of standard 30-06 military ball ammunition, the same cartridges the machine gunners were burning through by the belt. He packed 60 more rounds in stripper clips. His hands shook slightly as he worked, not from cold, from fear. He'd killed deer, never a man. What if he froze? What if the moment came and his finger wouldn't move? What if the experts were right and the Winchester was just a toy and he was about to become victim number 15? Cross pulled Chen's photograph from his pocket. Bloodstained. Torn. The baby's face still visible. He set it on the ammunition crate next to his cot. Then he lay down and tried to sleep. He couldn't. His mind kept spinning through scenarios. The Japanese snipers were professionals. They'd been doing this since China, since Manchuria. They knew how to hide, how to wait, how to kill. And Cross was a 27-year-old lieutenant who'd never shot at anything that could shoot back. The mathematics were brutal, but Chen's daughter would grow up without a father. Bradley's mother would get a telegram. 13 other families would bury sons and brothers and husbands. Cross couldn't change that. But maybe he could stop number 15, and 16, and 17. At dawn, he grabbed the Winchester and moved out. The bunker was a shattered concrete pillbox that overlooked the coconut groves. Japanese had built it. Marines had taken it. Now it belonged to whoever was desperate enough to use it. Cross settled in, rested the forestock of the Winchester on a piece of broken concrete. Comfortable. stable. Then he waited. He didn't scan quickly, didn't look for a man. He looked for things that didn't belong. The jungle was noisy. Birds screaming, insects buzzing, insects. The distant thump of artillery that never stopped. Cross filtered it all out. He moved the scope slowly, grid by grid, dissecting the wall of green in front of him. 1 hour passed, 2. The sun climbed higher. The temperature rose. Sweat dripped into his eyes. His muscles cramped from staying motionless. But he didn't move, didn't shift position. Professional hunters know that movement is death. The prey you're watching might not see you, but the prey you're not watching will. His father had taught him that. At 9:17, a branch moved. There was no wind. The air was dead still. But 87 feet up in a massive banyan tree, 240 yards away, a single branch dipped and swayed. Cross froze. He watched the spot, barely breathing. The branch moved again. Then the shadows resolved into a shape. It was a man, dressed in dark clothing, wedged into a fork where 3 branches met. He was facing east, watching the supply trail where Cross's battalion had been moving ammunition crates. The Japanese soldier was waiting. Patient, professional, waiting for a helmet to pop up, waiting to put a bullet in another American neck. He had no idea that 240 yards to his flank a toy rifle was pointed straight at his chest. Cross reached up slowly, adjusted his scope, 2 clicks right, compensating for the slight breeze he could feel on his left cheek. He settled his cheek against the stock. The wood was warm, familiar. He'd held this rifle 1,000 times on ranges in Illinois, in competitions where the stakes were ribbons and pride. Now the stakes were life and death. He breathed in, let half of it out, paused. The trigger on the Winchester broke at exactly 3.5 pounds, glass smooth. He'd spent hours tuning it at Camp Perry before the war. His finger rested on the trigger. Light pressure, not enough to fire, just feeling the resistance. In his mind, he saw Chen's face, the fear in his eyes as he drowned in his own blood, the photograph of a baby girl who would never know her father. Cross tightened his finger. 3.5 pounds of pressure. The Winchester cracked, sharp and clean. The recoil drove into his shoulder like a familiar handshake. 240 yards away, the dark shape in the banyan tree jerked violently. Gravity took over instantly. The Japanese sniper tumbled backward out of the fork in the branches. His rifle spun away from him, arms windmilling, body falling through 90 feet of empty air. He hit the ground with a thud that Cross couldn't hear but could feel in his gut. There was no movement at the base of the tree. The threat was gone. Cross didn't celebrate, didn't even exhale with relief. His hands moved automatically, lifted the bolt handle, drew it back. The spent casing ejected with a metallic ping. He shoved the bolt forward. A fresh round stripped from the magazine. Locked into the chamber, the crosshairs remained steady, hovering over the empty branch, because Cross knew something the other officers didn't. His father's first rule. Where there's one deer, there's always a doe nearby. Japanese snipers didn't work alone. They worked in pairs. If there was a shooter in that tree, there was a spotter somewhere close, watching the same kill zone, likely armed, definitely angry. If Cross celebrated now, the spotter would put a bullet in his head. He began to scan the surrounding trees, moving the scope with agonizing slowness. The 2.5 power magnification forced him to search inch by inch. The jungle canopy was a nightmare of shadows and false shapes. Every vine looked like a rifle barrel, every patch of moss looked like a helmet. He had to trust his eyes, trust his training, find the anomaly. 26 minutes passed. Cross didn't move, didn't blink more than necessary. Sweat stung his eyes. Ants crawled up his leg, biting. He ignored them, just watching. At 9:43 he found him, 60 yards north of the first tree, in a different banyan. A shape was moving. This soldier was lower, maybe 50 feet up. He was climbing down the trunk, trying to retreat. He'd heard the shot, seen his partner fall, realized their position was compromised. It was a fatal mistake. Movement is the sniper's death sentence. Cross tracked him through the scope. The Japanese soldier was moving carefully, but he was moving, descending branch by branch. Cross led the target slightly, compensating for the downward motion. He breathed, squeezed. The rifle barked. Different sound this time, the echo bouncing off different trees. The second sniper fell backward, crashing through the canopy, hitting the rotting mulch of the jungle floor within seconds of his partner. 2 shots, 2 kills. Cross reloaded from a stripper clip, 5 fresh rounds sliding into the magazine. His hands were steady now. Steadier than they'd been last night. Steadier than they'd been before the first shot. That realization hit him harder than the recoil. He'd just killed 2 men, human beings with families and lives and fears, and he felt nothing. No guilt, no remorse, no horror at what he'd done, just a cold mechanical satisfaction. Target acquired, target eliminated. Next target. He thought of Chen, of the 40 minutes of drowning, of the photograph in his pocket. And Cross understood. This was mathematics. They were killing his men. He was killing them first. The toy rifle was working. The morning wasn't over. At 10:05, Cross spotted movement in a tree 180 yards southeast. Another sniper repositioning. The gunfire had spooked him. He was trying to find a new hide before the American ghost hunter located him, but he moved too quickly, too carelessly. Panic makes you sloppy. Cross centered the crosshairs. The range was shorter, less bullet drop, easier shot. The Winchester spoke again. The 30-06 round covered the distance in less than a fifth of a second. Sniper number 3 fell without a sound. At 11:12, Cross found number 4. This one was trying to escape, climbing down from his perch in a palm tree 210 yards away, moving branch to branch with desperate speed. He'd watched 3 men die. Decided survival was more important than the mission. Cross tracked him, waited for a clear shot between the fronds. When it came, he didn't hesitate. The shot echoed across the groves. The 4th body joined the others on the jungle floor. 4 snipers dead, 7 remaining. But the Japanese were learning. Cross could feel it. The pattern changing, the rhythm of the hunt shifting. At 11:40, he spotted the 5th sniper. This one had made a critical error. He'd chosen a position with good visibility forward, but no awareness of his silhouette. The late morning sun was climbing higher, backlighting him against the sky. Amateur mistake from a professional soldier. Proof that fear degrades performance. Cross took his time, calculated the angle, adjusted for the slight elevation difference. The weapon cracked one more time. Sniper number 5 pitched forward out of his hide, fell 80 feet, didn't move when he landed. By noon on January 22nd, Daniel Cross had killed 5 Japanese snipers in less than 3 hours. The news spread through the battalion faster than malaria. The men who had spent 6 weeks making jokes about his mail-order sweetheart stopped laughing. They started appearing near the bunker, watching from a distance, whispering. Cross didn't acknowledge them. He kept the scope to his eye, kept scanning, because the jungle had gone quiet in a way that was more threatening than the constant tension of being hunted. The remaining 6 snipers had realized something fundamental had changed. The Americans had a counter-sniper, someone who could see them, someone who could reach out past 200 yards and put bullets exactly where they needed to go. After the 5th kill, the enemy adapted. They stopped moving, stopped repositioning, went completely still. Cross spent the next hour staring at empty trees, seeing nothing, finding no targets. The easy part was over. He was no longer shooting at targets. He was in a chess match. Move and countermove. Patience against patience. Captain Hayes appeared at the bunker entrance just after 1 in the afternoon. His face was unreadable. For a long moment, he just stood there, looking at Cross, looking at the Winchester. Finally, he spoke. "How many?" Cross didn't take his eye from the scope. "5 confirmed." Hayes was quiet for a moment. "The men are calling you a ghost hunter. The men should stay away from this position. I'm a target now." Hayes nodded slowly. Then he did something Cross didn't expect. He saluted. Not the casual salute officers give each other in the field. A real one. Crisp. Respectful. "Carry on, Lieutenant." He left. Cross went back to scanning the trees. But the jungle remained silent. No movement. No mistakes. No opportunities. At 1700 hours, he finally withdrew. Made his way back to the battalion perimeter. Exhausted. Hungry. But alive. That night he sat in his tent and stripped the Winchester down. Cleaned it. The routine was mechanical. Comforting. He kept waiting for the guilt to hit. For the horror. For some kind of emotional reckoning with what he'd done. It didn't come. 5 men. He'd killed 5 men in 6 hours. And all he felt was a calm, focused determination to go back tomorrow and kill more. He thought about writing to Sarah, his wife back in Illinois. But what would he say? Instead, he pulled out Chen's photograph. Blood-stained. Torn. The baby's face still visible. Somewhere in California, that little girl was 8 months old. Learning to crawl, maybe. Making sounds that weren't quite words yet. Living a life that would never include her father. Cross had killed 5 men today. But Chen was still dead. Bradley was still dead. 13 others were still dead. The mathematics hadn't changed, only the direction of the killing. He loaded 5 fresh rounds into the Winchester, checked the scope mounts again. Everything was perfect. Tomorrow the Japanese would be smarter. They'd learned that moving during the day meant death. They'd change tactics, adjust patterns, and Cross would have to adjust with them. He lay down on his cot, closed his eyes. Sleep came easier than it should have. The rain started at 0400 on the morning of January 23rd. Not the light drizzle that passed for normal in the Pacific. A heavy tropical storm that turned the world into a grey smear of water and mud. Visibility dropped to less than 100 yards. Everything beyond that was just shapes, shadows, ghosts in the rain. Cross moved to his position anyway. A different bunker, 70 yards south of yesterday's location. Never used the same spot twice. That was basic fieldcraft. But it was also survival mathematics. The Japanese knew where he'd been. If he went back, they'd be ready. Mortar coordinates already calculated, snipers pre-positioned. He'd be dead before he chambered the first round. He settled into the new position, rain hammering on what was left of the concrete roof, water dripping through cracks, his uniform soaked through in minutes. He wrapped the scope in a piece of oilcloth, keeping it dry, keeping the lenses clear. Without the scope, the Winchester was just an expensive club. For 4 hours he sat in the rain, shivering, watching grey shapes move through grey rain, seeing nothing, hitting nothing. At 08:15 the rain broke, not stopped, just lessened. The heavy downpour became a drizzle. Visibility improved to maybe 200 yards. Not great, but workable. Cross unwrapped the scope, wiped the lenses, started scanning. At 0912 he found target number 6, and everything changed. The sniper was positioned in a palm tree 290 yards out, farther than any of yesterday's kills, much farther, at the absolute outer edge of what Cross's scope could resolve clearly. This wasn't coincidence. This was a test. The Japanese had done their own mathematics. They'd measured the distances of the 5 bodies, calculated the maximum effective range of the American's weapon, and positioned this sniper just beyond it. If Cross missed, they'd know his limits. They could position all remaining snipers at 300 yards and be safe, untouchable. If Cross didn't shoot, they'd know he was afraid of the distance. They'd push the engagement ranges until the Winchester became irrelevant. It was a tactical gamble, brilliant, ruthless. Cross studied the target through the scope. The man was maybe 70 feet up, partially concealed behind palm fronds. From this distance, with residual rain in the air, the shot was borderline impossible. He did the mathematics in his head. 290 yards, light rain creating unpredictable air density. Crosswind from the east, maybe 4 miles per hour, maybe 6. Bullet drop would be severe. At this range, the 30-06 round would arc nearly 20 inches below the point of aim. The wind would push it another 6 to 8 inches right. Miss high, and the bullet disappears into the canopy. The sniper escapes. The Japanese win the tactical exchange. Miss low, and the round impacts harmlessly in the trunk. Same result. The margin of error was measured in inches. At nearly 300 yards, through rain-soaked air, with a 2.5 power scope. The experts back in Washington would say the shot was impossible, that Cross should wait for a closer target. That precision has limits. But Cross wasn't in Washington. He was in a bunker on Guadalcanal, watching his 6th opportunity to even the odds. He adjusted his point of aim, holding high and left, compensating for drop and wind, trusting ballistics he'd learned on ranges back home, trusting physics. He controlled his breathing, let his heartbeat settle, waited for the natural pause between beats. Then he squeezed. The Winchester roared, the sound different in the rain-dampened air, flatter, less echo. For a long second nothing happened. Then 290 yards away, the shape in the palm tree jerked, slumped, toppled forward. The body fell through the rain, hit the ground with an impact Cross couldn't see through the drizzle. 6 kills. Cross cycled the action. Brass ejected, fresh round chambered. He'd just answered the Japanese test. The American could reach 300 yards. There was no safe distance, no position beyond his capabilities, but answering the test had consequences. At 09:57, Cross heard a sound that made his stomach drop. Whistling, high-pitched, getting louder. Incoming. The first mortar shell exploded 40 yards short of his position. The blast sent up a geyser of mud and shrapnel. Metal fragments whined through the air, embedding in trees, slicing through vegetation. Cross threw himself flat, face in the mud, hands over his helmet. The second shell hit 20 yards short, closer. They were walking the rounds in, adjusting. They'd triangulated his position based on the sound of the Winchester. The muzzle flash barely visible through the rain, the angle of the shot. Cross didn't wait for the third shell. He grabbed the Winchester and ran. Legs pumping, boots slipping in the mud, rain still falling. vision blurred. Behind him, the third mortar round landed directly where he'd been sitting. The explosion was massive. Concrete and logs disintegrated. The shockwave hit Cross in the back like a fist, knocked him forward, sent him sprawling face first into a muddy shell crater. Debris rained down. Chunks of concrete, splintered wood, hot metal fragments hissing in the rain. If he'd stayed for 5 more seconds, he would have been vaporized. Cross lay in the crater, heart hammering, ears ringing, tasting blood and mud. The Winchester was still in his hands. Muddy, wet, but intact. He'd just learned something the hard way. The toy rifle couldn't save him from artillery. When the enemy stopped playing the precision game and started deleting entire grid squares, all the marksmanship in the world didn't matter. This was their world now. Volume of fire, mass destruction, everything the experts said wins wars. But Cross wasn't dead. And as long as he wasn't dead, he could keep hunting. He crawled out of the crater, moved north, low and fast, found a fallen mahogany tree 120 yards from the destroyed bunker. Good cover, good angles, different position. He wiped mud from the scope lens, checked the action. Everything still worked. The Japanese had tried to kill him with mortars, failed. That meant they'd be watching, waiting to see if they'd succeeded, waiting to confirm the kill. Cross made them wait. For 2 hours he didn't move, didn't fire, just watched the trees through the scope, patient, still, letting the enemy wonder. At 14:23, patience paid off. Sniper number 7 made a mistake. Maybe he was rattled by the mortar barrage. Maybe he thought the American was dead. Maybe he just got careless. He'd positioned himself in a banyan 300 yards out. Good spot, good concealment. But he'd focused on visibility forward and forgotten to check his background. He was silhouetted against a patch of lighter vegetation. Just barely. Just enough. Cross took his time, calculated the range, adjusted for the wind that had picked up after the rain, controlled his breathing. The shot rang out. Clean. True. Sniper number 7 dropped from his perch like a stone. 7 kills in 2 days. An hour later, Cross found number 8. This one was 94 feet up in a massive banyan, well concealed, good position. But the afternoon sun had shifted. It was backlighting him against the sky, creating a silhouette where there should have been only shadow. The same mistake number 5 had made yesterday. Proof that even professionals get sloppy when they're scared. Cross centered the crosshairs, compensated for the extreme vertical angle, fired. The 8th body fell. 8 Japanese snipers dead in 36 hours. At 1700 hours, Captain Hayes appeared at Cross's position. He looked different, older, the weight of command showing in lines around his eyes. "Battalion commander wants you back at HQ." Cross cleared the chamber, made the weapon safe. "I'm not done." "Yes, you are. For today." Hayes looked at the muddy, battered Winchester, then at Cross, covered head to toe in dried mud, face streaked with sweat and rain, eyes that had seen too much in too short a time. 8 confirmed kills in 2 days, Lieutenant." Cross didn't respond. Hayes continued. "Intelligence says there were 11 total. That means 3 left. The best 3. What?" Cross finally looked at him directly. "In any group, the ones who survive the longest are the best. Those last 3 watched their friends die for 2 days. They know I'm out here. They know the sound of this rifle. They know my tactics." He patted the Winchester. "They're waiting for me." Hayes was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Get some rest. Dawn tomorrow." That night, Cross cleaned the Winchester for the 3rd time in as many days. Strip, clean, inspect, reassemble, check the scope, check the mounts. The routine was meditative, familiar. But his mind kept running calculations. 11 snipers total, 8 dead, 3 survivors. Those 3 had spent 2 days watching their unit get dismantled by a single American with a bolt-action rifle. They were scared now, but scared professionals were the most dangerous kind. Cornered, desperate, willing to take risks they wouldn't normally take. The last 3 wouldn't be in the trees tomorrow. They'd learned that lesson. The trees were death traps when someone could see you from 300 yards away. They'd adapt. Ground positions maybe, crossfires, traps. Cross loaded 5 fresh rounds, the brass gleaming in the lamplight. Somewhere in the darkness, 3 men were doing the same thing, loading weapons, making plans, trying to figure out how to kill the American who'd killed 8 of their friends. It was a chess game, move and countermove. Cross pulled out Chen's photograph, looked at the baby's face one more time. Tomorrow he'd go back, hunt the hunters, try to make it to 9 kills, 10, 11, or become the 15th casualty. The rain started again at 0300 on January 24th, heavier than before, torrential, the kind that turned foxholes into swimming pools. Cross moved through it to a new position, a cluster of large rocks 70 yards south of yesterday's fallen tree, never the same spot twice. He settled in, rain streaming off his helmet, uniform soaked before he even sat down, the Winchester wrapped in oilcloth until conditions improved. At 0817 the rain eased, not stopped, just eased enough to see. Cross unwrapped the scope, started the patient work of scanning. 15 minutes later, he found something wrong. A sniper in a palm tree, 190 yards out, only 40 feet high. The palm fronds offered decent concealment. But from Cross's elevated position on the rocks, the man's shoulders were clearly visible, too clearly. Cross's finger moved to the trigger, started applying pressure, then stopped. His father's second rule echoed in his mind. If the deer is too easy, check for the wolf. The last 3 snipers were survivors, professionals who'd watched 8 men die. They wouldn't expose themselves like this, not unless they wanted Cross to shoot. This was bait. Cross lowered the rifle slightly, widened his focus, started scanning the area around the obvious target, looking for the real threat. It took 11 minutes of patient searching. At 0828 he found him, 80 yards northwest of the palm tree, buried deep in a banyan 91 feet up. Perfect concealment. His rifle wasn't trained on the groves where Americans moved supplies. It was trained on yesterday's position, the fallen tree where Cross had been. The setup was brilliant. The decoy in the palm tree drew Cross's fire, revealed his position, and the real sniper was already aimed, ready to put a bullet through Cross's head the instant he fired. It was exactly the kind of tactic that kept you alive when everyone around you was dying. Cross had a tactical problem. Shoot the decoy, give away his position, hope he could kill the real sniper before the real sniper killed him. Do nothing, let the trap sit there, wait for another opportunity that might not come. Or option 3, use their own trap against them. Cross made his decision. He took a breath, steadied the Winchester, aimed at the decoy in the palm tree, fired. The decoy sniper jerked, fell, exactly as planned. But Cross's hands were already moving, ripping the bolt back, ejecting spent brass, slamming it forward, fresh round chambering, swinging the muzzle toward the banyan tree 80 yards northwest. The real sniper heard the shot, jerked his head toward the sound, looking for Cross's position, trying to acquire the target. But Cross was faster. Crosshairs on the dark shape, on the man who'd set a perfect trap and almost pulled it off. The trigger broke. The real sniper fell backward out of the tree. Arms spread wide, rifle tumbling away. 91 feet to the jungle floor. 2 shots in 6 seconds. 9 kills. 10 kills. Cross didn't celebrate. Didn't wait to verify. He grabbed his ammunition and moved. Scrambled east along the rock line. Threw himself into a drainage ditch 40 yards away. 6 seconds later, Japanese machine gun fire tore apart the rocks where he'd been sitting. Stone fragments sprayed into the air. Bullets ricocheted with that distinctive whine. Deadly, precise, overwhelming. If Cross had stayed even 5 seconds longer, he would have been shredded. He lay in the drainage ditch, heart slamming, breathing hard. They were throwing everything at him. Mortars, machine guns, tactical deceptions. This wasn't a sniper duel anymore. This was total war. And Cross was one man with a bolt-action rifle fighting an entire defensive network. But he'd just killed 10 Japanese snipers in 3 days. 1 more to go, and that last one would be the hardest. The ghost who'd learned every lesson. Who knew every trick? Who was now hunting Cross as hard as Cross was hunting him. Cross relocated again, crawled another 100 yards through mud and vegetation, found a shell crater filled with rainwater, the only cover available. He lowered himself into the water, let it rise to his chest. The cold was shocking, but cold kept you alert. He rested the Winchester on the crater rim, wiped water from the scope. 10 snipers dead, 1 ghost left. Cross scanned the trees for an hour from his water-filled hide, seeing nothing. The jungle silent in that threatening way that meant something was watching, planning, waiting. At 0947 he realized his mistake. He'd been looking up, searching the canopy, the branches, the traditional sniper positions. The 11th sniper wasn't in the trees, he was on the ground. Cross caught movement in his peripheral vision, 60 yards to the south, a shape moving through the ferns, low, fast, using vegetation for cover. The Japanese sniper had watched 10 men die in the canopy and learned the fundamental lesson. The trees were death traps, so he'd abandoned the vertical war, gone to ground. Now he was crawling through the undergrowth like a tiger in tall grass, moving toward the rocks where Cross had been an hour ago. Cross watched him through the scope, breathing shallow. The sniper reached the rocks, set up in a prone position. his rifle aimed toward the drainage ditch, his back to Cross. 38 yards away. It looked like an easy shot. Center mass, impossible to miss. But Cross had learned to question easy. He kept the crosshairs on the man in the rocks, but widened his scan, checked the surrounding area, and found the second soldier, 70 yards northwest, behind a fallen tree trunk, motionless. His rifle aimed at the same drainage ditch. They were working as a hunter-killer team on the ground. The man in the rocks was the flush, meant to draw fire. The man behind the tree was the hammer, waiting for the muzzle flash, ready to shoot while Cross cycled the bolt. The Winchester was too slow for a two-target engagement at this range. Cross couldn't kill both before one killed him. He needed a different approach. Cross didn't sink deeper into the water like yesterday. That trick was used. Instead, he trusted stillness. He froze, became part of the crater, part of the landscape. The Winchester held low against his chest, invisible in the muddy water, and he waited. At 10:13, the soldier in the rocks stood, signaled to his partner with a hand gesture. They hadn't found Cross. They assumed he'd fled farther east after the machine gun fire. Both men began to move, walking parallel paths, sweeping the area, looking for tracks, disturbances, any sign of the American. They walked right past Cross's crater, their backs exposed, both of them, between Cross and the tree line. This was the moment. Cross erupted from the water, mud streaming off his face and uniform, the Winchester coming up to his shoulder in one fluid motion, muscle memory from 1,000 repetitions. The closer soldier was 42 yards away, unaware, vulnerable. Cross fired. The man collapsed like gravity had tripled. The bolt handle came up, back, brass ejecting with a hiss as it hit water. Forward, fresh round locked. 2 seconds, maybe less. The second soldier was turning, his rifle rising, eyes going wide as he saw Cross standing in the crater. It was a race. Bolt action against reaction time. Cross fired. The second soldier went down. 11 shots, 11 Japanese snipers dead. But as the echo faded, Cross heard the sound that changed everything. Voices, multiple, urgent, angry, coming from the tree line, less than 50 yards away. The snipers hadn't been alone. An infantry patrol was coming to investigate, to find out why their best marksman had gone silent. And Cross was standing in a crater with 3 rounds left. An entire squad bearing down on his position. The mathematics were brutal. Cross dropped back into the crater, water closing over him again. He tilted his head back, nose and eyes just above the surface. The Winchester held vertical, the muzzle pointing at grey sky. If water got into the bore, the next shot would blow the barrel apart. The voices grew louder, branches snapping, equipment rattling, boots in mud. These weren't patient ghosts. This was an infantry recovery team, moving fast, loud. Cross counted at least 6 voices, maybe more. They found the first body 42 yards from his position. The conversation shifted from confusion to rage. Then they found the second body. Cross heard orders being shouted, soldiers coordinating, and then the sounds moved toward him. He realized his fatal error. He'd left boot prints, a clear trail in the soft mud leading directly to this crater. He'd drawn them a map. The voices closed. 30 yards, 25. Cross gripped the Winchester. 5 rounds total. 6 men minimum. The math didn't work. At 10:31, a Japanese soldier appeared at the crater rim, looking down, scanning the muddy water. His eyes locked onto Cross's face floating on the surface. For one frozen second, neither moved. The soldier opened his mouth to shout. Cross raised the Winchester out of the water and fired from the hip. The heavy round hit center mass at 10 feet. The soldier flew backward. Cross worked the bolt while still half submerged, mud grinding the action. But it cycled. He stood, water cascading off him. 2 more soldiers at the rim, rifles coming up. Cross fired left. The man dropped. Bolt cycle. 2 seconds of pure muscle memory from competition ranges. Fired right. The third man fell. 3 shots in 4 seconds. Magazine down to 2 rounds. More voices. Running. Closing from multiple directions. Cross scrambled up the crater's north side, boots slipping, hauled himself over, sprinted into undergrowth. Behind him, rifle fire erupted, bullets snapping past, that supersonic crack that means inches. Cross ran 20 yards, dove behind a mahogany trunk, pressed flat as bullets chewed wood above his head, splinters raining on his helmet. He risked a look over the log. 2 soldiers advancing, 50 yards out, moving tactical. Cross raised the Winchester, scope wet and blurred, but he could see center mass. Fired. Lead soldier crumpled, cycled the bolt. 1 round left. The brass casing hissed, hitting wet ground. He was holding an empty gun with 1 bullet, and he heard them flanking. Voices left and right, closing the trap. You can't hold a flank with a single-shot rifle. Cross ran, not a tactical withdrawal, a desperate sprint, deeper into jungle, away from his lines but away from the trap. Vines grabbed his ankles, thorns cut his face, bullets cracked past his ears. 1 round hit a tree by his head, bark exploding. He kept running, 90 seconds of full sprint. Heart rate maxed. Vision tunneling. Another shell crater ahead. Dry this time. He threw himself in, slid down the dirt wall, landed hard at the bottom, rolled onto his back, gasping, clutching the Winchester. Behind him the voices faded. The Japanese regrouping, checking casualties, reluctant to chase a ghost into deep jungle. Cross lay there 10 minutes, letting his pulse drop below 200. He checked the rifle, caked in mud, water dripping. Action fouled, opened the bolt. The final brass cartridge glinted in the chamber. 1 round. He patted his pouches. Nothing. All his ammunition was back at the crater, sinking into mud or in enemy hands. 1 bullet between him and empty. At 10:47, Cross began moving. Slow, deliberate, the way hunters move, northeast, circling toward American lines. Wide berth around the ambush site. Every step calculated. Dry ground. Watching birds for movement ahead. 25 minutes to cover the distance. At 11:13, he saw concertina wire through trees. A Marine sentry challenged him, weapon raised. Cross identified himself, voice raspy. The sentry lowered his rifle, waved him through, staring at the mud-covered officer. Cross stumbled into the perimeter, didn't stop for food or clean clothes, walked straight to battalion headquarters. Captain Hayes was waiting. He looked up as Cross entered, saw the mud, the blood, the battered rifle. Didn't ask if Cross was okay, asked for the report. Cross leaned the Winchester against the tent pole, sat heavily on an ammunition crate, gave the numbers in a monotone. 11 snipers killed. 4 days. 12 rounds fired against snipers. 11 hits. Then infantry engagement. 3 more confirmed. 5 rounds. Total 14 enemy KIA. Hayes stared. Ammunition status. Cross tapped his pocket. 1 round left. Hayes looked at the filth-covered Winchester. Does it work? Needs cleaning, but it works. Hayes sat back. Processing. An entire Japanese sniper detachment that had paralyzed his battalion, wiped out by 1 man with a hunting rifle. Get sleep. Sector's clear. Job's done. But the job wasn't done. 2 weeks later, Colonel Brennan summoned Cross. Build a sniper section. Train others to do what Cross had done. They'd found 14 Springfields with unearthed scopes, 40 expert marksmen available. Cross had 1 condition. He kept the Winchester. Brennan smiled. The toy has earned tenure. Cross spent 12 days training, stripping 40 experts of arrogance, teaching them that paper targets meant nothing in jungle. He taught them to brace against logs, against each other. He taught wind, elevation, patience, not just shooting, hunting. By January 30th, 32 men could hit man-sized targets at 300 yards while concealed. 16 two-man teams. Shooter and spotter. February 1st, final exam. Cross took 4 teams west of Matnikau River, paired with Corporal Martinez. At 07:20, a Japanese soldier appeared. Martinez spotted. Cross fired. 6 hours, 6 kills with 7 shots. Other teams reported similar results. End of day 23, enemy KIA. American casualties 0. 12 days of operations, 74 confirmed kills, 0 friendly losses. The mail-order sweetheart proved 1 precision rifle equaled a platoon of machine guns. But then the bureaucrats came. March 1943. Official assessment team from Aberdeen Proving Ground. They watched sniper operations, interviewed Hayes, examined Springfields, took notes, flew back to Washington. 6 weeks later, their report landed at the War Department. Conclusion: precision rifles highly effective in jungle. Developed sniper doctrine immediately. Credit went to the assessment team, experts who identified need and implemented solution. Daniel Cross's name never appeared in official documents. Neither did Martinez. Neither did Hayes. The record stated Army evaluation personnel identified deficiency and corrected it. Innovation born from desperation, from watching friends die, from a 27-year-old with a deer rifle and nothing to lose. It became paperwork. Someone else's name at the top. Hayes protested, wrote letters, submitted statements, ignored. The Winchester Model 70 became a footnote. Field modification unofficial, not recommended. Cross said nothing. His men were alive. That was enough. But it wasn't the end. 42 years later, 1987, military historian Dr. Robert Chen, researching Pacific sniper development, found a reference in battalion records. Extraordinary marksmanship. 11 enemy snipers in 4 days. Didn't match official reports. Chen dug deeper, found Martinez's name, tracked him to Arizona. 71. Retired machinist. Martinez told everything. Chen found Cross 6 months later. 71. Virginia. Retired diplomat. The man who hunted in jungles spent 40 years in suits, discussing policy, negotiating treaties, Chen interviewed him 3 hours. Lieutenant Cross, your Winchester and tactics may have saved 40 to 60 American lives. You pioneered techniques that became doctrine, but you received no recognition. How does that make you feel? Cross was silent long. Then, I never counted lives saved. I only remember Chen and Bradley and the ones who didn't come home. Everything else is paperwork. Daniel Cross died June 7, 2001, 79 years old, small funeral, family, few friends. But at graveside, 4 old men appeared. Strangers to Cross's family. They introduced themselves quietly. Snipers, Vietnam era, trained on foundations Cross laid in 1943. They'd read his obituary in a veteran newsletter, driven hundreds of miles to pay respects, to make sure Cross's family knew. To make sure someone remembered. Today, at the National Firearms Museum in Fairfax, Virginia, you can see a Winchester Model 70 in a glass case, surrounded by famous weapons, Thompsons, Garands, grease guns. The Winchester looks unassuming, scratched stock, simple scope. The placard reads, Field Modification Guadalcanal, 1943. No name, no details. Visitors walk past without stopping. They don't know it killed 11 elite snipers in 4 days. They don't know it proved every expert wrong. They don't know it changed modern warfare. They don't know Daniel Cross's name. But now you do. And that's how we keep the real heroes alive. Not in official reports, not in medals, but in stories we tell, names we remember, truth we refuse to let die. Daniel Cross was 27 when he picked up a toy rifle and decided one man could make a difference. He was right. And 60 years after his death, 4 strangers drove hundreds of miles to make sure his family knew it. That's the legacy bureaucrats can't steal. That's the truth that survives paperwork. That's why we tell these stories. So the Daniel Crosses of the world don't disappear into silence. So the men who changed everything don't become footnotes. So the truth outlives the lies. Remember his name, Daniel Cross, the ghost hunter of Guadalcanal, the man with the toy rifle who killed 11 snipers and saved 74 lives, the hero the army tried to erase. But we won't let them. Not today, not ever.